not cold, but just a little nippy. See, that changes when you get older. Oh, thank you.
Sir Galahad is back.
Sir Galahad, that feels better.
Well, I got the camera going, so I'm ready to go.
He's got his Galatian shirt on.
Yep, I did my jungle shirt today.
Yeah.
Can't see my house, she's behind the bush.
Huh?
Can't see you, you're behind the bush.
Oh.
George Bush. Well, today we're going to talk about something that's not so much doctrine, but something that's special to me.
Special to you.
Yeah, and maybe something that you guys can identify with. You know, when you're young, and if you're a new Christian, you seem to think that you've got everything pretty well in control, you know, and you've got all the rest of your life ahead of you. And sometimes, even if you're called to the ministry or whatever, as time goes on, you get involved in so many other things that you feel like you didn't put as much time into the ministry as you could have, or something might happen in your life that puts you in a position where you're not able to do everything for God that you really would like to do. And then when you get older, you get about 50, 60, 70 or something like that, you start to think, well, you know, I've really wasted a lot of time. And you think about it more, I think, when you're older than you do when you're going through it. Because when you're going through it, you say,
You don't think anything about it then.
yeah, you say you got plenty of time. So today I'm going to be speaking on returning the years that the locust had eaten. And the Bible talks about the fact that God can return to you the years that the locust have eaten. And I think, at least to me anyway, that means that God's going to allow you to make up for the lost time that you really blew when you were younger. And I've told them at church that I really have done that myself probably the last 20 years, is ask God to let me make up for the lost time that I might have wasted as I was going along. And when you think about it that way, you want to. I think most of us want to do everything for the Lord that we can possibly do and be pleasing to Him. And if you've already wasted a lot of time, and you think you don't have so much time to live, then you're probably going to have to, in order to make up for what you lost, you're going to have to do 2 times more, or 3 times more, or 4 times more in a short period of time that you have. So I started thinking that way. I don't know whether everybody else thinks that way or not. So I kind of asked the Lord, let me make up the quantity and the quality of time that I lost, and make up for that lost time and the time that I have left. So it keeps you kind of on point. It keeps you trying to really do whatever you can, as much as you can for the Lord, just to please Him. And I remember when I was young, I was about 19, 20, 21 when I first started in the ministry, that I wasn't really interested in much of anything else. I was always interested in sports. I do some sports, but my thought pattern was that, Lord, I love you and I appreciate what you've done for me, and I appreciate you calling me. And you know, when you play baseball, you want to be the best ball player that you can be, and if you don't, you really shouldn't be out there. And when you play golf, you want to be the best golfer. Everybody wants to be the best at what they do. And so this I try not to make it a selfish, self-centered thing, but I was conscious of the fact that I wanted to please God more than anybody else at that time, and I wanted to do more for Him and His glory than anything else that I was doing in life. And I haven't always done that because there's been times which I know there's been times that I've wasted a lot of time, and for various reasons. And so I think we all ought to be conscious of that, that we really want to do our best for the Lord and glorify God. And not that we can get any credit for it, but just for the fact that we want to do the best for Him because we love Him more than anything else. And so if y'all will look to the book of Joel, I'll read this verse before we get into the other part of
Did you
the
say
other verse.
Job?
Joel,
Joel?
Joel. It's over near the end of the Old Testament. And I'm having to find it too while I forgot to write it down. But Joel's one of
Ezekiel?
huh?
Ezekiel?
Before the book of
And
Amos.
just passed it.
It's just the book before Amos.
Just before Amos.
The book before Amos.
The
Daniel
number
and then
is
Joel.
5, 6,
Right after Daniel. Oh, Hosea's in between there.
569.
Okay. Whereabouts in Joel?
Still looking.
Verse 4 says of the Locust.
Ah, you found it.
Chapter 4.
Oh, chapter 4.
Chapter 4. I had Joel 1 for some reason.
Well, might start there, but I mean, they're real short chapters.
It's
Wait a
not.
minute.
No, 1-4, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I couldn't find 4.
Ah,
I should have had it for. I got the other verses, but I didn't.
I'm sorry.
look this up.
1-4, yeah.
So I'm going to read 1 through 4, and so you can get an idea. But this is kind of like the text of the message today, and we're going to read it. It says, "The word of the Lord that came to Joel, the son of Pethuel." And it's got in my notes here. It's talking about the invasion of Locust. It says, "Hear this, you elders. Give ear, all inhabitants of the land. Has such a thing happened in your days, or in the days of your fathers? Tell your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children, another generation." So probably there was a powerful attack of locusts that they'd never seen anything like before. And then he says in verse 4, "What the cutting locust left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust left, the hopping locust has eaten. And what the hopping locust left, the destroying locust has eaten." So all these different kind of locusts were eating each other, but the locust had destroyed and was destroying physically the land. And as you relate that to the concept I was talking about, they probably were praying also a prayer that the Lord would return the land to them, that things would begin to grow, and eventually they would be all right. And the same principle applies spiritually, that if the locust or the devil or we ourselves have eaten up God's time in our life, that we should pray that the Lord would give us, return to us the years that the locusts have eaten. So if you turn to 1 Corinthians now, I'm going to read there, and it's going to be another set of verses that we need to look at. 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter. So we look at 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, and beginning with verse 8. It says, "Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. So Paul's talking here about the fact that he was untimely born. In other words, he was born, and at the time, I think what he's really saying is that I really was not among the 12 apostles and disciples, but I came along a little later, and the whole essence is that God, for some reason in his sovereignty, did not place Paul with the original 12 disciples. He didn't place him immediately walking with Jesus. So he let him come to be saved later. And so now he set him aside to be an apostle and to write a great portion of the New Testament. And so last night we studied in 2 Corinthians, and we talked about the fact that Paul was still struggling with that credibility issue, and he was still saying, I really am an apostle. And these false apostles have come in and said that I am not, simply because I wasn't with Christ and the original disciples. But then he keeps saying, which is true, that God gave him a special calling, and he struck him down, and he allowed him to be very learned in the Jewish religion and be the Pharisee of Pharisees. And then, after you struck him down and saved him, God had a whole other plan for Paul. And his plan was different than the disciples that he used. The disciples had their own place, their own plan, and yet Paul, after wasting really so many years and letting the locust eat him, and after serving basically the devil for so many years, is now being used of God. And so he's saying in verse 9, for I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. Now if you look at Peter and John and Matthew and all the other disciples, James, the brother of Jesus, most of those guys were just doing a regular job. They weren't really persecuting the church, and they weren't in a high. I don't think any of them were on the intellectual plane that Paul was on, because he'd be trained to be a Pharisee, and he was also persecuting the church. So not only did he waste the years the locusts had eaten, but he had used them in a very evil, negative way by persecuting the church of Christ and persecuting Christ himself. And so therefore, he feels like he really is undeserving. And he says in verse 10, but by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, I worked harder than any of them, but it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. So he had the same kind of thought that I was thinking just a while ago. He is seeing that he did waste those years when he was persecuting the church, and now he's working harder than all the other apostles, because he has to make up for that time that he wasted. And he has to make up for that time, at least in his own mind, of the persecution that he did upon the church and upon Christians. And so he's got a special, extra special burden to make up for that. Let me use an illustration. Steven Strasburg, who pitches for the Washington Nationals, who are in a pennant race right now, and the magic number is 4 games. If they can win either 4, the Braves lose 4, they'll win the pennant, or at least the division. And that's going on right now. Well, Steven Strasburg was, I think, the #1 draft choice in all of baseball a couple, 3 years ago as a pitcher. First game he pitched last year, he struck out 14 people. And he used to regularly strike out 18 people, which is phenomenal in the minor leagues. Well, last year when he started pitching, all of a sudden they took him out of the game because his elbow was in pain. And he sustained an injury that he had to have surgery on his elbow, and it's called Tommy John surgery. And they get that name from a guy named Tommy John who pitched for the White Sox years ago. And they have to, I think they take some ligaments or something out, and they put new ligaments in and re-strengthened the elbow. And so it's been called Tommy John surgery ever since. Some guys never come back from it. They're never the same. Some guys come back and they're stronger. Well, Strasburg came back this year, and he's pitched up to a couple of weeks ago. And the ownership of the Nationals, trying to protect him for the future, decided to shut him down and not let him pitch anymore, because he's already pitched enough that they're afraid that if he pitches too much, he might re-injure his elbow. In the last 2 games he pitched, he got really hit really hard. So now he's being shut down, and the Nats are in the midst of a pennant race. First time since 1930 that Washington, D.C.'s had a team in a pennant race. And he can't help his teammates. He has to sit on the sidelines, and they're trying to win these last games, trying to win the division. Then they've got to play a playoff series, probably with the Braves. Then if they win that, the National League pennant, then they go play in the World Series if they win. Now, here's Strasburg, the ace of the staff, the best pitcher they've got, and to sit on the sidelines and feel helpless while his teammates try to win the pennant. That's a terrible, terrible feeling, because the thing you do best you can't do. And when you're in a team effort, you're not only doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for the whole team. So he's going to have to live with that for a whole year, and if they lose, there's going to be a lot of second guessing as to maybe he should have pitched or maybe he shouldn't have pitched. So he's going to have to wait all the way to next year to come back and pitch, but in his mind probably is going to be this concept. He's probably not going to be thinking about Locust. He's probably going to be thinking about baseballs, but he's going to be thinking, I've really got to make up for what I missed last year, and I've really got to come back and try to help my team in the midst of this that I've done. So there's always that thing. So you know, it's if you don't really care anything about the Lord, you're not going to care whether you make up for lost time or not. It'll be irrelevant. But if you really love Jesus and you want to do your very best for Him, then you should have that desire to please God and glorify Him the very best that you can do that. And so that's what we're talking about today. You know, and if you do get in that frame of mind sometime, and you're thinking about, man, I've really messed up and wasted a lot of time, it could lead to a little bit of depression. And I got some notes here. One says that you ruin the present, or you can ruin the present by looking at the past. And I've always had a habit of doing that. And I've tried really hard to get out of that habit. But if you keep looking in the past and you don't live in the present or look toward the future, then you can ruin the present. Then you're still wasting time, and you're still letting the locust have your time. So, you know, and there's so little time to serve the Lord, and we shouldn't be sitting around like I've done in the past saying, well, if only I'd done this, if only I'd done that, if only I'd done the other, you know. If we do what we're supposed to do in the present, then we won't have to worry about the future and the past. It'll take care of itself. And so that's a place I'm trying to get, and I think we all should strive for that. And then there's another principle that we need to really, I think, take a look at too. And that's the principle that we should never worry about things that we have no control of. That's a pretty good principle. Never worry and stress ourselves out and pull ourselves down and waste our time about things that we can't control. And I've had to deal with that problem too, because some things happen that we can't control. We get older, our body starts to fall apart. We do the best we can with it. And then, like, if you wake up one morning and somebody calls you and tells you that your friend has been in a car accident or something, well, you have no control over that. It's something that you could not have prevented. And so, instead of worrying about stuff, overly worrying about it, that would neutralize our present then that is a bad thing. To not worry about things we have no control of. I think if you look around at the world situation and see all the bad things that are happening, it's pretty miserable sight. And if we get caught up in that too much, and we can always pray about it, but we can't actually do anything to fix it, then we can waste a lot of time worrying about that instead of doing things that we can ourselves actually do. And I think I'll do that too. So this is a sermon on me this morning. But remember that. Never worry or over worry about things that we have no control of. Some things we just, and that's what makes our Christianity come alive. If we believe that God is sovereign over His creation, and if we believe like we do that God is really in control of every single thing that happens, He either causes things to happen or He allows things to take place. We don't know why, but if we say anything less, if we say, for instance, well, God just don't seem to be able to control what's going on in the Middle East, then we're taking away the sovereignty of God. And if you say that God cannot do one thing, or He cannot control one thing in His own creation, then you've taken away His sovereignty, and He's just like everybody else. So you've got to keep that principle in your mind that God, even though we don't understand why He's doing it, is aware of everything that's happening. He is omniscient, which means He can see in the future, He can see in the past, He can see in the present. And He knows when things are happening. And we don't understand why He allows certain things to happen. And we'll never understand that. We don't even understand why He allowed sin to come into the world. I'm sure that it wasn't a big surprise to Him, or else He wouldn't be God. He knew it was going to happen, but He still allowed it to happen. And so we don't know what His purposes are, and we can't think in His mind. We just can't do it. So we have to accept things by faith, that He's going to work it out for His good. And then there's another principle that says, never look back. It's just real simple things today. You know, when we well, finally one person's got a problem other than me. If a racer is racing, say he's got a 100-yard sprint, they always tell him, don't look back. Because by turning your head and getting off stride and looking back, you may lose a step and lose the race. So they say just keep your eyes on the goal, keep your eyes on the prize, keep running hard as you can, watch the ribbon, and don't worry about what's behind you. You know, and that's another good principle. Paul said in one of his letters, he said, I press forward to the goal that's before me, and I run the race. And he didn't even say he wanted to win the race. He must have been a race fan. If he'd been here today, his middle name, it probably would have been Paul instead of Paul of Tarsus. It probably would have been Paul of NASCAR, you know, because he always used racing, and so he may have raced in his time. I don't know, but he said I press on to the goal before me, and he said his aim was not to win the race, but he said my aim is to finish the race. I've got to finish the race. And that goes along in a way with the thing about the Locust, because he was determined to finish the race that God had given him to finish. In Philippians, he said, in a colloquial terminology, he said, well, I was just as soon check out of here and go and be with the Lord, but I'm tired of all this. But I want to stay here because I want to serve the Lord, and I want to finish what He has for me to do, and I want to finish the race. Yes.
I have to ask, how will he know when he's finished?
When he dies.
Oh.
Probably when he dies. So we need to. That's a great thought. Don't look back, but finish the race. And if we can all just finish the race, there's been preachers in the past who started out well, and something happened or something went wrong, and they just quit preaching. They stopped, and they really didn't finish the race, and that's sad. And what if, this is a hypothetical question, what if Jesus had decided just before, well, in the Garden of Gethsemane, that he didn't want to finish the race. He didn't want to go through this, and he quit. We would really be in bad shape. Nobody would be saved. But thank God he finished the race. And if he can finish the race that he finished and endure the pain that he endured, then surely we can finish the race and do what God has for us to do. You know, because but don't look back. And somebody said one time, a racer or something said, never look back. Some athlete said this. They said, never look back because somebody might be gaining on you.
Well, that's true.
That was a pretty good statement, you know.
I can mess you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's another principle which is close to that, and that is to dwell in the past is to fail in the present. Fail in the present. If you dwell too much on the past, then you're going to fail in the present because you're not concentrating on the present. So again, and then going along with that is the thing about making up for the past in the present, which we talked about with the Locust. Another thing is put our energy into the present and do what needs to be done. And a lot of people say this. It's probably not. I don't know if it's scripture, but a lot of people say it. But they say live in the moment. You know?
In the now.
In
Yeah.
the now.
Right.
So that's pretty good saying too. I worry sometimes about the future. I'm always worried about the past, trying to get over that stuff. But if we can worry about the future, put our energy in the future, live in the moment, then we'll get a lot more done. I think Henrietta's a good example of that. She pretty well lives in the present. And her present is a lot bigger than ours because she gets about 100 times more done than we do.
For that reason.
Yeah, but I think that's part of it. She lives in the present. And she really, really didn't worry about what's happened in the past. And really not too much about the future, but it's just right now, what am I supposed to be doing? So I think she's got a pretty good hold on things that some of us others don't have, you know. And there's you know, and Paul talks about being the least of the apostles, and you know, when he talks about that in that verse, he also says, "I'm the last of the apostles." The last of the apostles to see the risen Savior. And others were with Jesus, but Paul was not with Jesus. And so we see that was something that Paul had to overcome. And it seems, I'm not going to be real dogmatic here, but we've been studying 1st and 2nd Corinthians for the last whole bunch of weeks. And it seems that Paul, not only in Corinthians but in the other books, he talks so much about that fact that he was not with Christ as an original disciple or apostle. And I don't know whether it really hurt him or whether he felt an inadequacy because of that or not, but I know that he talks about it an awful lot. And he wasn't with Jesus, but Jesus took him up in the third heaven. And he says, I don't know whether it was a vision, whether it was awake, whether it was a dream, but I know that he spent a lot of time with God, a certain amount of time in that third heaven, and God taught him and told him things that he said, it's not lawful that I should say this to anyone else. They're very sacred, private, very important, secretive things. And he received his apostleship in a very unusual way. The others, the disciples, they were called personally by Jesus with his own lips, and they walked with him every day, and they ate with him. They ate the same food he ate. They rode in the same boats he rode in. They slept in the same houses or fields or wherever they slept that he slept in. And there was a real close personal relationship. Well, Paul didn't get to enjoy that. For whatever reason, God allowed him to be doing his own thing, persecuting Christians, while the disciples were hanging out with Jesus and having fellowship with Jesus. And I don't know, this is speculations, Jesus, but Paul maybe longed for some of that. He might have missed some of that personal time with Jesus. But it fits right in with biblical theology that God is sovereign, God is in control of everything, God is in control of his creation, and that God had a special reason for Paul not being one of the 12 apostles. It's one of those things Paul didn't really have a choice in. You know, we talked about a while ago, we get frustrated because of something that we can't control, and we shouldn't worry about it. Well, Paul couldn't control that. He could not control when God saved him. And that's another thing that strengthens our theology, is that Paul didn't just get saved when he wanted to. He had to wait till God struck him down on the way to Damascus. And God saved him in his own time and his own way. And the disciples had no control over whether they would be a disciple or not. God was completely in control of that. He was the one that sent Jesus. Jesus was the one that searched out the disciples. He's the one that chose the disciples. The disciples did not really choose him. And so it's something that Paul, if he did worry about it, he probably should not have worried about it, and maybe he didn't worry about it, because he didn't have any control of it. It was something out of his control, and it was God's way of working out what he wanted to work out. So the lesson, I think, for us is, and this return, the years of Locust have eaten, we may have to apply it to that too. We shouldn't really overly worry as Christians about when God chose to save us, because it's his choice, and we shouldn't probably feel guilty about that. We got people in our church. We got Howie, who was probably, when did Ramzan preach that sermon when he came in? It was how old?
It was 2008,
So he would be about
wasn't it?
9 or 10, I guess. But if he was preaching in Scotland, we know he was saved then. So Howie, in other words, Howie was saved at an early age, maybe 8, 9, 10. We don't know precisely the day or the hour.
He's been interested his whole life.
Yeah, he's always had a spiritual.
Since he was 2 years old, he listened to preaching.
Yeah, it's unnatural. Yeah, it's amazing. But he's,
Very unusual.
but how
I
is,
just thought, well, maybe he just don't really know. He's just thinking that, this is what people do. But it wasn't true, because he's still, how many years later? 15 years later, he's still the same.
Right. Never stop.
Never stops.
so Howie,
He isn't even interested in a conversation,
He's not even
unless
interested
it's about
theology.
theology.
well, except for one
Isn't that
thing.
amazing?
He's not interested in a conversation of anything but theology, except when it comes from Helensburgh, where a red-haired girl lives. So he does have an interest in that.
What's that?
He does have one interest in that red-haired girl
Red Scott.
that he likes. But other than that, it's all theology with him. But the point here that in the scripture is that we can't control when we're saved, because Howie was saved at a very early age. We don't even know when. Now, we got a guy named Bob who started our church about 6-8 months ago, and he says that he was saved when he was either 69 or 70 years old.
When he was 69 or 70.
Yeah, that's what his testimony is. He tells us that. So he's only been saved for a few years. He's probably maybe 75 now, or maybe he's 73. I don't know. But his salvation experience is come very late in life, which is very unusual. But he seems to really love the Lord and shows fruit of salvation that he's been saved. And so Now, he could look, if he wanted to let the locust eat him up, he could look at Howie and he could say, well, man, I should have been saved when I was 8 years old. I wish I was, and worry himself to death about it, and fret about it, and complain about it, and gripe about it, and beat himself up about it. But he doesn't think that way. He's just glad to be saved. Even though it come late in life, he's not worried about the years the locust eating that much, except the fact that he is really very energetic in wanting to please the Lord. So he might have a little bit of that, the years the locust have eaten in his mind, because he wants to make up maybe some for the years he lost. But he doesn't let it pull him down. And he doesn't look at Howie and try to beat him up because Howie got saved and had all those good years that he never had. And again, he's content with it because he knows God saved him, and God chose that time to save him. So we worry sometimes about things that we really don't need to worry with. You know, I'm not exactly sure where this is. I've got it in my notes. It says, I am what I am. You know, and that's pretty good. Now, Sister Braxton, who comes to our Bible study some, Clara, she's been our friend for many years to Bible maturity. And she even went to Trinidad and Tobago with us, and we had a wonderful time of fellowship. Well, I don't know whether she said this down there the first time or here, but I know she said it somewhere. It may have been down there, but she made this famous statement that we still hang on to and we still use in our conversation when it applies to a situation even to this day. Her famous saying was, and I quote, "It is what it is." She's always saying, it is what it is. And so that's a good attitude. It's like living in the present. And it's accepting what is happening. And it is what it is. And if you apply that to God, whatever God is doing right now, it's His business, and He's going to do what He wants to do. And it is what it is. And we can't do anything about it, and we can't change it. We can pray and we can ask Him, for things. But it is what it is. I thought that was really, really good. Yeah. There's a. Can't have C. There's another thing that we do sometimes. We don't like the position we're in sometimes. Sometimes we put ourselves in that position. But, one thing that we can relate to that is not liking where we are sometimes is if you're last in the line at anything. I will walk the length of Walmart to find the shortest line.
Me too.
I think a lot of people, some people just get in line, they don't care. But it really bugs me, man. I have gone to the register before, express lane. It says 12 items or less or whatever. And I'll count them real quick, and I'll have 13 items. And I'll take one of my items out and dump it. Just so I can go through the express line. So people's got some really weird habits and weird concepts. And so you don't like to be last in line. But what if God, in some circumstance, has placed you for whatever reason, this circumstance, last in the line, and you have to endure that? And that's a little bit of what Paul was talking here about, because he said, I'm the last apostle. I'm the last one. I was last in line. And he talks about it so much that I'm not so sure that it didn't bother him a little bit. And he says, I'm the last apostle. I'm last in line. And last night, in 2 Corinthians, the last chapter, we're about to finish up, he was talking about, he was writing a letter to the Corinthians, and it was the third visit that was coming up to Corinth. And all these people, false apostles, had been running him down, telling lies about him, slandering him, trying to take over his church, confusing the Christians in Corinth. And he was writing a letter to tell them he was coming and there was going to be a showdown and to get their 2 or 3 witnesses together because we're going to finally have this thing come to a head. And as he was doing that, one of the questions that they were belittling him about was this question of apostolic authority. They were saying that he wasn't really an apostle because, for whatever reason, probably one of them was, you were the last one, you went with Jesus, blah, blah, blah. So this thing of being last in line is really not a good thing. I'm ashamed to say this, but I've gotten forgiveness, so I want to tell you about it. It's a shameful thing. I went to wrestling in Miami one time when I lived in Miami, and Dusty Rhodes was wrestling, and I determined I was going to see him. Well, I took the church bus. The name of our church was Grapevine Heights Baptist Church. It was over by the airport. And here I am, a grown man, 30, 40 years old, and my car wouldn't start, so I got to get to wrestling. I forgot what night. It was Friday night, I think. And so I took the church bus. The name of our church was Grape Land Heights, so we painted our bus what color? Purple. Exactly. It was white with purple trim. So I got the purple bus, and I headed downtown to wrestle. I went through they got these things like the Bay Bridge. They got these toll booths like we got out here on Highway 1. Well, I went through that toll booth, and the bus was too wide, and I got it stuck. So there I was, stuck in the toll booth. Couldn't reach a thing to put the money in, so I had to get out. And finally, I think I finally had to put it in reverse and go in another lane to get out of there. But by the time I got the bus unstuck from the toll booth, which it sounds like I'm making this story up, but I'm not, I was late for wrestling. So when I got to the parking lot of the Coliseum, I started to go in. And this really rude policeman was really a jerk. He said, "No," I said, "Can't let you in, it's too late." I said, "Man, I got to see Dusty Rhodes. I got stuck in the toll booth." And blah, blah, blah. He said, "No, you're not coming in here." He said, "I determine the last one that comes in."
Oh.
And I tried to reason with him, and he wouldn't reason. So I said, "I am going to see Dusty Rhodes one way or another." So I went around the building and started walking around the Coliseum, and I saw these windows. So I pulled one of them, and it went up. So I said, "Dear Lord, please forgive me, I'm about to sin." And I climbed in the window, I put the window back down, and I went in, and I enjoyed the wrestling. And then when I came out, this policeman was looking at me, and he gave me the weirdest look when I went by. And I said, "I might have been last in line, but I got to see Dusty Rhodes." And he didn't arrest me, he just laughed. And so finally I tried to find some guy that works there and paid for the fee, but I was last in line. I paid the consequences, you know. So sometimes being last is good, sometimes it's bad. Let me tell you one other thing before we close. We were in Scotland, and I'm sure Henrietta remembers this. We were about to leave the Isle of Isla, and they got these great big giant ferries. It's probably as big as from here to the other end of the building, at least long. And they got all these cars on it, and all these buses, and all these trucks, and people on it. And we were going to get on the ferry, and we went to, I think it's Loch Gilphead or one of those places over there. Anyway, we went over to another island where we were going to catch a bus, kind of like a Greyhound bus. And so we got out of the ferry and we was all standing there in a group. So Pastor Adam, which y'all I think have met, most of you, he came up to us and he said, "Okay, everybody get in the queue." I said, "Okay." Jack says, "Yeah, we'll get in the queue. So Adam walked off and left us standing there. And all of a sudden we all looked at each other and we said, "What the heck's a queue?" And Pastor Depp said, "Don't worry about it, I'll take care of this." He said, "I'll go over there and look on the ground and find the queue." So he's on the way looking all over the ground for the letter Q. And he looks, and he can't find it nowhere. So he came back to us and he said, we can't find it. So we sat there, all of us was looking for the cue, because we didn't know what a cue was. And we said, maybe he's talking about a bus or a car, and we didn't know what to do. So I thought he'd never come back. But he got back, and he said, you guys haven't gotten in the queue yet? He said, you're going to be the last in line to get in the queue, and we're going to be the last ones getting out of here. And we said, we don't know what a queue is. He said, don't know what a queue is? He said, in Scottish, a queue means line. You get in the line. we didn't have a clue, man. We were so stupid. So Deb said, I knew that all along. I knew what a queue meant. I just didn't tell you. Yeah, sure, Deb. Yeah, sure. So we all got over and got in the queue of the line, but we were the last into the line. And we were the last on the bus, and we were the last to get the big heavy luggage in, and we were the last that had to, me and Henrietta brought our golf clubs and had them in big bags, and Jack was grumbling and griping because he had to pick up his stupid golf clubs. So we finally got on the bus and held the bus up. We were last in the queue. So,
Never heard that before.
yeah, it's a unique thing. Now, every time you hear Q on the TV or something, you know what it's talking
I
about.
see it in books and stuff now, but I never did before because I didn't know what it was, I
You just
guess.
kind of passed over and didn't, that's right. C-U-E.
We,
No, it's
Q-U-E.
Oh, Q-U-E.
Something like that, yeah.
Q.
So we've learned a lot of stuff. So we know a lot of stuff about Scotland that we didn't used to know. And but you know, it goes back to that same thing that Paul was talking about. I'm last in line.
Was that town Kennicraig?
Kennicraig, I think. Yeah, I believe that's what it was. Kennicraig, not Loch Gilphead. We drove to Loch Gilphead. Kennicraig. So anyway, if you're last in line, here's one good saving factor about being last in line. Jesus said, the first should be last, and the last should be first.
Yeah, I can remember that.
So if we live for the Lord every day and do everything we can in our power, our feeble power to please Him and glorify Him, then we're really actually going to be first in His sight instead of last. And it doesn't really matter so much time-wise or wait in line type stuff. The important thing is that Paul, it's the same principle we talked about last night in 2 Corinthians. Paul said, he didn't say first and last, or last and first. Last would be first. But he did say, I glory in my weakness, because when I am weak, He is strong in me. The same type principle, in a sense. And he says, when I'm strong, well, these false apostles who were they were able to speak real well, and they were trying to get money, and they were trying to discredit Paul so they could take over the church. They were looked at as eloquent speakers, brilliant people, and they were very strong to the people. But what he was trying to do, he was trying to say, look, I could be like that if I wanted to be, because I'm sure he knew 1,000 times more than they knew intellectually. But he said, I have found that when I am weakest, Christ is strongest in me, which makes me strong because Christ is strong in me. And so that was his whole point. So even though we might not be the best or the first, if sometimes the weaker we are, the stronger we are for Christ's sake to glorify God. So really, we should just thank God that we are where we are, and that Sister Annie is coming in the door when I'm saying the last 5 words. But her hair looks good anyway. Because all those watching by video, she's been to the beauty parlor, backslid while we're having Bible study.
I did appear.
Come in, you made it, you appeared.
I did appear.
Let me give you a brief synopsis real quick of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Go ahead and sit down. We love you, Annie. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you very much.
Let me tell you
I love
something.
You all too.
You could come in this place and be bald-headed, and we'd still be happy to see you. So anyway, we've been talking about God returning the years the locusts have eaten, the fact that the time that we've wasted in our life, the hours and days and months we've wasted doing frivolous things or whatever, that as we get older, if we ask God to make up for that lost time by using us in a more productive way than He ever has. And we just got to talking about being last. Jesus says the first will be last and the last will be first. And last night we were talking about 2 Corinthians, and he was saying there something very similar. He was saying to those Corinthians, the false prophets were trying to throw him out of his own church, and he was somewhere else writing the letter. And they were saying they were strong, they could speak well, he couldn't speak well, he was weak. But what he wrote back and said was, I am sometimes weak, although he could be very strong if he wanted to be. But he said, even though I'm weak, that's when I'm the strongest, because that's when Christ is strong in me. So the weaker we are, the stronger Christ is in us. And so that's basically kind of what we've been talking about. Been a good time.
Okay, did you inquire about the chapel again?
I did. I couldn't find Daphne the other day, but we went down there before we started. There's some women in there, so we're gonna maybe try to
Try to go back to
talk
the
to her today if we
chapel?
can find her.
Okay.
We don't know about the time. We got to find out. So maybe we can see Daphne today before we leave. Find out.
It's nice and quiet.
Yeah, it's amazing. If we
So
get through there, you
you
can get
was
quiet.
in 2 Corinthians, right?
Well,
Or did you skip around?
it was
Joel.
Yeah, Joel in
Joel,
1 Corinthians.
Joel?
Yeah, Joel 2,
Right,
Joel 1:2, talk about Locust.
yeah.
And then, what was that, Matthew?
First Corinthians.
Yeah, it was in 1 Corinthians.
1
15.
Corinthians.
I forgot the
Yes,
chapter,
15th chapter.
13th, I think, yeah. So that's basically what we're talking about.
Hey, you're new to the class, aren't you?
15,
Yes.
1 Corinthians
How do you
15:8.
like it today?
15:8.
Was it interesting to you?
It's interesting to me because the first thing that he brought up was the thing that you waste time, and that you can't control. Situations come up and you can't control them, and it's like almost sometimes it was almost like bringing to me